Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? Lierre, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for doing this again, by the way. I was just thinking of, I moved up to Washington State. I'm actually in Miami this week on vacation, but I as I walk in the morning, I see all these slugs and things. It made me think of you for some reason. I was thinking about when you talked about when you tried to make a garden,
The
and
slug, the
you've been,
slug story.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, all the slugs that you went into. And I just hadn't seen somebody, but in Washington, they're everywhere. They're all across the road, slugs and cats,
Yep.
everything. They're like
Well,
crazy.
it's a temperate rainforest up here, so we got slugs.
Where are you at, by the way?
I'm in Crescent City, which is the last town in California before Oregon.
I see. Okay. So
Yeah, and right
you're
on the
way up.
coast. So it's redwoods and banana slugs. That's
Okay.
that's like our national animal is the banana slug. So
Interesting. How have you been? How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, it's not too bad here. How are you doing?
I'm actually doing well as well. Hey, what kind of dog is that? I saw you petting your dog.
Well, already had two full-grown Great Pyrenees, and then 2 months ago I got two puppies because my other dogs are almost 10, and
Okay.
you know what's coming. So I went ahead and I loaded the two new ones, and
Too
they're
bad. Yeah,
completely
that's a new one. Okay, yeah, beautiful dogs. Yeah, I was
interested in
gonna say
one.
the bigger dogs are nice, but unfortunately, yeah, they tend to have a shorter lifespan than the little bitty dogs. They tend to
Yeah, the big dogs 10 to 12 is all you get, and it's a
live.
very bad. The interface between giant dogs and humans, that the lifespan issue is like the one
That
bad
is true.
moment.
Yeah, I
So
guess you just need to get a pet giant tortoise or something like that. They'll outlive
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah, 150 years. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, let me, obviously for the folks that aren't aware, you wrote a book called The Vegetarian Myth, as a long-term vegetarian, I guess vegetarian or vegan, I can't
I
remember.
was a vegan.
Yeah,
I was all in.
all in.
I don't do things halfway.
And you had some health issues from that and
Oh yeah.
realized there wasn't really any really realistic way to truly
Mhm.
be vegan, I guess. I guess it's just well, as you say, a myth,
Yeah.
it's that sort of thing. So as we see, as time goes by, we see more and more stuff, being driven by, media that's saying, we all have to eat more plant-based. That's just the future. That's the inevitable future. If we don't do it, the cities on the ocean will all be underwater in 20 years or something along those lines. And so in order to prevent that, we all have to start, you know, eating the plant-based food, which is, um, I think it's just a way to kind of convince people to eat more processed food, quite honestly. I think that's where ends up going, clearly. But what are your thoughts on this sort of push, the environmental push? Because I think it seems like, the ethical push, worked for some people, the health argument worked for some people, although I think those things are starting to be shown to be not particularly compelling. But the environmental seems to be what they're really leaning on, and creating a quote a health emergency. This is not only a climate emergency, but it's a public health crisis, and therefore we get to execute or enact executive powers to force whatever we want done, which is often miraculously aligns with corporate interests in many cases. Do you see that is that something, or am I just too jaded?
It's really hard to know ultimately, where the push comes from, because I think there's multiple factors that are, trying to make this happen. I think a lot of it is just ideologically driven. It all started with this one report that came out from the United Nations that was called Livestock's Long Shadow. And that thing must be almost a decade old by now.
It's
And that was
2006.
where, yeah, it was a long time ago. And that was where this all started about, oh, it's so terrible. Cows are wrecking the climate. Now, never mind that there were vast herds of ruminants that roamed this planet for millions of years, and they didn't wreck the planet. They're all gone, all of those animals. There were once 60 million bison here in even just in the continental US, and they've been traded in for 40 million really sick cows. And how anyone can think that the bison didn't wreck the climate, but somehow the cows do. I mean, just even before you get even any further into it, it doesn't, even on a common sense level, it just doesn't make any sense. But when they wrote this report, the problem was that they were comparing apples to oranges. And immediately it was actually the American Society of Chemists came out with they reran the figures for them and said, you got this completely wrong. So for every other sector of the economy, they only did what are called tailpipe estimations. So when you drive your car, how much carbon is released out of your tailpipe would be a good example. But that does not count in all the energy that goes into making the car, to transporting the car, to making the oil that you're now going to burn, like all of the other kind of supporting ways that fossil fuel is used to make a car, and then for you to drive the car. So in this report, all they used was the tailpipe. But when it came to things like beef, they did everything. So it was a, cradle to grave kind of estimation of the amount of carbon. So of course it came out way bigger. And I think their estimate was like 25% of, greenhouse gases are created from cattle. And it was just ridiculous. And so when the American chemists came out with this report that explained this to everyone, like how they got it so terribly wrong. I mean, the people who did the report admitted, like, oh, you're right, we didn't do that correctly. So, I mean, the thing has been debunked from nearly the beginning of its existence. And it's what we call a vampire myth because it refuses to die. So you still constantly see, oh, they're responsible for 25%, for 50%, for 70%. Like every time you read it, it gets higher and higher, and none of it makes any sense. So the part that is true is that, yeah, it's like 3%, which is not nothing, but it's also just silly. I mean, we know if there's a problem with the atmosphere, we know what it is. It's that we're burning fossil fuel. We dug up stuff that's been buried for millions of years, and we've burned it all and released it into the atmosphere. It really has nothing to do with any other plant or animal on the planet. It's us, and it's what we did, and we all know it, but they'd rather blame cattle because somehow it's, I don't know, easier. So the whole thing is absurd, and it's really hard to argue with people who hang on to numbers that are so obviously silly, and yet they do. And so it's just become this sort of touchstone for a lot of the environmental movement, for instance. And I mean, I consider myself an environmentalist, but this is a fight you have to have all the time with people, where it's like, this is simply not true. And I will walk you through why it's not true. And then, they get into the methane. And the problem with that is that in order for cellulose to break down, the only creatures that do that are these bacteria. And they do release methane at the other end of the process. But it doesn't matter whether it happens inside a cow or outside a cow, just on the surface of the ground. That's the process, and it does release methane. But it's always been part of the process. So, these cycles have been going on for millions of years. That's why we have a stable atmosphere. So these bacteria aren't doing anything bad. It's like literally how cellulose is broken down. Otherwise, we'd all be like up to our eyeballs in dead grass, because they're the only creatures that can do it. And they do it much better when they're inside a ruminant. And that's what ruminants are designed to do, is to carry around that bacteria that will then digest that cellulose. But in the meantime, it's going to happen one way or another. So I don't know why they're blaming cattle for this. It's really the bacteria that do it. And it's not bad. It has to happen. We have to have creatures in an ecosystem that degrade. You and I can't do it. The only creatures that can do it are generally microscopic. And the entire renewal of our earth is due to the action of these little tiny, micro beings who can break things down like cellulose and make them available again to the whole living community. So, we've got a dead planet without them. So I don't even know why you'd want to vilify them. We know what's releasing the methane that's actually destroying the planet, and it's mostly natural gas. That's where the leaks are coming from. And that's why there's, been this, and also the methane that's frozen under the tundra that's now being released. And again, that's up to us. It really is. I don't know why they're blaming the cycle of life, essentially. And that's what they're doing when they pull out these ridiculous statistics. So anybody who blames methane or who blames cattle, it's hardly worth talking to them, because, they're in so far into an ideology. It's hard to pull them out. It can be done. I was pulled out. So, it is possible to reach people with better information. And I don't know. We have to do it because on some level, it's like the people who care most about the future of the planet are just completely on the wrong path. And I want their passion, and I want their commitment, and I want, just the amount of energy they're willing to give to this. We need that, to kind of start setting things on a better way. But they've been led astray by information that it's just wrong. And they don't intend to be wrong. They just picked up the wrong set of facts. And now, we tend to surround ourselves, right, with people who agree with us. So we're all in our little echo chambers. I get that, but we have to break through. So I just feel like that's one of my jobs here, is trying to explain to people that I otherwise agree with about a lot of things, like we're more or less aligned on our basic value system. But this one, they don't understand it. They don't understand the nature of nature. They don't understand the nature of grasslands, especially, and the role that ruminants play, because you can't have a grassland without ruminants. And, they've just taken this on as kind of their ideological armor, and it's really hard to get them to put it down. But we have to do it, because they're getting this wrong, and they're creating public policy and even law that's just headed in completely the wrong direction. So I don't know, does that help answer your
Yeah,
question?
I think the point is, you made it's frustrating to talk to people that have kind of bought into this ideology. No matter what you say, they just put on blinders and they don't want to listen, or put on earmuffs and don't want to listen. But I mean, the point is, we do have some of those people directing some of our public policy, which is
Yeah.
a real concerning part. And I think the part where, and this is something I haven't touched on this before, but I know I looked at some of the research regarding what happens to grass if cows don't eat it. Well, the grass grows, it falls over, and methane is emitted by methanogenic bacteria anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like
It doesn't matter.
it's
Yeah.
not gonna, there may be a slightly different rate, but ultimately methane is going to be generated anyway. And you rightly point out there are so many other methane sources, and the interesting thing is we're discovering them all the time. I mean, it's not just that the hydroelectric power has it associated with it. I mean, natural
Oh,
gas.
methane bombs. I mean, they're one of the most horrible sources of greenhouse gases are dams.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I see, every year I keep seeing more and more methane leaks discovered around the world, and the cow population is basically stable. It hasn't really increased that much. In fact, I think there's been some estimates where it's actually gone down a little bit in the last 30 or 40 years. But regardless, I think one of the things that I see is, I mean, obviously when you bought into the vegan ideology as a younger person, doing it for the right reasons, perhaps. And we have a lot of people that are energized, they're young, they want to make a difference, they want to save the world, or whatever their motivations are. But like you said, they're misguided. And if you could turn some of that energy into saying, hey, it's not what you eat, it's how that food is raised, regardless if
Yes.
it's plants, animals, and so on and so
Yes.
forth. And if we can get more people energized in that regard, I think we do a lot better. I think right now, my biggest concern is, it seems like cheap food is what they want to feed us. I mean, they clearly
Yeah.
are, and it has implications not only for the environment, but also for human health. Um, what do you think is, I mean, if you could sort of outline a path forward, like they made you the king or the queen of the world or whatever, how would you go about doing things? Yeah, I know it's not going to happen to either of us, but if you had that sort of magic power, could you sort of say this is how we should proceed?
Yes. And so first thing would be to withdraw all the subsidies for the cheap agricultural, the monocrops. So all of that cheap carbohydrate, just done, like no more. So the wheat, the soy, the corn, all of that is massively subsidized because it has to be. And this is where it gets, you get into like the big picture. There's essentially 6 corporations that control the entire world food supply. And because there's only 6 of them, they have a monopoly. And so they can command the price that they want to pay, and then the farmers have no choice. So every year, there's this huge gap between the price that these corporations are willing to pay and what it actually costs farmers to produce it. And there's a huge gap there, which means that every year those farmers would just be bankrupt. And what happens is the United States government steps in, and we have the Farm Bill, and they give these subsidies. And those subsidies are literally to fill that gap so that corporate America can buy that. Not even American, they're just global corporations. They can buy it for that cheap, completely undercut what the farmers are trying to do, but the farmers stay in business because we, the taxpayers, fill in that gap. If you took that away, the entire thing would collapse. And I don't want to leave farmers in the lurch. This is not their fault. They have no idea, what's happened to them. They don't know. My family's been farming this land for 3-4 generations, and no matter how hard I work, I cannot make a profit. and they're angry and they're depressed and they're not our enemy. So these are not people we need to vilify at all. The number one cause of death for farmers in rich countries as well as poor, so in the United States as well as India, number one cause of death is suicide. And it's because of that, no matter how hard they work, they're essentially serfs to these giant corporations. So if we took away the subsidies, I don't want to leave these people bankrupt and suicidal. What we need to do is step in and show them a better way. And there are people already doing that. So if you haven't read the work of Gabe Brown, I would highly recommend his book, because he's from North Dakota. He was a farmer of that sort. And then he figured out that grass-based farming would repair his land and also repair his bank account. And he's made a good living by doing this. He's figured out how to do it well, and he can talk to other farmers because he is one of them. And when farmers are really like down to earth people, right? It's literally what they do. And when you show them that, hey, this is actually better for all these reasons, and you can make a really good living, you know, they're willing to give it a try. So that's what he does, is he explains to other farmers that, you know, these annual monocrops, there's no future here. We're just wrecking our land, and we're wrecking our children's future, and we're making terrible food that, you know, is killing people and all of it. And we can repair this land and make a good living at it. And they'll sign on and try it. So he's one of the people that I always recommend, because he's doing such a fantastic job. So that's what the government should be doing instead, is help farmers, you know, give them some subsidies to point them in the right direction. Put your land back into a perennial prairie, you know, put it back in native grasses, and get some kind of ruminant on there and learn how to do that well, because it doesn't just work because you put them on. You have to learn, you know, what is the pattern of ruminants and grasses that actually makes that area better and denser and more rich with life. And if you just let the cows move around the way they want, they will overgraze and ultimately they will degrade it. But the reason they do that is because there's no predators, and we need to act like the predators that we are. When you add predators into any ecosystem that has been devoid of them, life comes back, because animals, the megafauna like the ruminants, their actual pattern is they're supposed to be tightly bunched and quickly moved. And when you add a predator, that's what happens. Their entire behavior changes. And we saw this at Yellowstone when they reintroduced the wolves. All of the waterways were completely trashed because the deer, the elk, would just sit around all day eating the tender, juicy stuff that's there by the water. And there was no cover anymore left. They had eaten it all down to the ground. All the topsoil was sliding into the rivers. It was just a mess. And they introduced the wolves, and within a year or two, it had just completely come back to life, because the deer had to move, and they had to stay tightly bunched and quickly moving because the wolves came at them. So everything got restored. All of these native plants came back, which meant all the birds could come back, and all the small mammals could come back, and all the reptiles and the amphibians could come back. They had cover, they had a place to live. And it's the same thing on a prairie. You have to have those predators. So I don't even care whether it's bison or cows, though there is a special place in my heart for bison. We can worry about that later. Just put some ruminant on it and keep them moving. So the person to really look to for this is Alan Savory. If you don't know the work of Alan Savory, he's got some great TED Talks. He's written a bunch of books. His organization is called the Savory Institute. He's been in some really good movies about this, but he's the one who really figured this out, that when you remove the predators, the ruminants do not behave well, and how to do that as a human being, how to keep those animals moving, how to observe your land and figure out what your land needs, and how to heal it using ruminants of whatever sort. And he's originally from southern part of Africa, and he watched as all the native areas there, that he was a ranger, a park ranger. That was his job, was to take care of these huge national parks, and they were just degrading every year because nobody understood this principle yet. And so bit by bit, he figured it out. And his story is very moving. It's very harrowing, but very moving about what happened there, but how he fixed it. So I would highly recommend any of Alan Savory's work, because he's the one that's really teaching farmers how to do this. But that's what I would do. So remove the bad subsidies, no more cheap carbohydrate, no more trashing the land, no more of these ridiculous annual monocrops, which are just, they're terrible for us. They're terrible for the land. Like, why? Let's get rid of it. Sorry, corporate America, you're not going to keep making profit off all of this. You have to figure something else to do with yourselves, and teach the farmers a better way. Most of them will take to it really quickly because they're people who understand, just step by step how things get done. They're, down to the earth people. So give them subsidies to figure it out. And then that's the good food, right? So get that into the supermarkets, get that into all the local stores. So part of this would, of course, involve a public education campaign, because We have to explain to people what grasslands are, why they're important to the planet, who are the community members of a grassland. So you have the grasses, you have the bacteria, and you have the ruminants, as sort of the core members, and then of course add the predators to really get them all to behave. But we need people to understand this, because right now they don't. They have no idea what happens on a prairie, and they have no idea why it's important. And they have no idea what agriculture did to those vast grasslands. You can read historic descriptions of people who were there 150 years ago. You could sit on a rock and watch for 4 days as a single herd of bison thundered by. Like, that's how many animals were there. And it's hard for us to imagine just the denseness of life that should be present in those places, because it's all gone. I mean, I've driven across the country. It's just corn and wheat from one end of that area to the other. And it's horrible. I mean, it's just incredibly sad. You're looking at, it's essentially a clear cut of the grass forest. It's all gone. It's 98% of the grasslands have been destroyed around the world. And it's so that we can have corn and wheat and soy. That's what did it. So I want the people who love this planet to understand the problem, the nature of the problem. And then I want them to understand that the solutions are really not grim. They're actually, they're beautiful solutions. Like they bring the life back, and they make the world whole, and they also support human health, and they support some very marginal rural communities that are dying from lack of ways to make a living. Anybody young leaves, and anybody who stays ends up addicted to heroin or meth, because they're hopeless places right now. And this is one of the reasons they're hopeless. Like, there's no economic future. And the reason there's no economic future is because, like I talked about, they're just serfs to these huge corporations. And people lose hope when there's no future. When there's no way to make an honest living, everybody just collapses under that. It's really hard to pull out, and they don't see a future for themselves, and they're correct the way things stand. So all of that can be repaired, all of it. Like, it's actually not a hard fix. And these are things that I think, whatever angle you come at it from, it's a good thing. It's a good in the world, and we can all participate in making that good, come to fruition. So that's what I would do. I would take out the subsidies, give the farmers good subsidies to do the right thing, give them the training they need, and then public education to get everyone to understand just the global importance of grasslands, and why we should love them and take care of them.
Yeah, I saw a stat that 50% of all calories in the world are coming from rice, wheat, and corn. 50% of every calorie produced in the world is rice, wheat, and corn.
Horrible. And there's not a single person at this point, when you test the actual protein in our bodies, not a single person. Like almost 50% of it directly comes from the nitrogen in fossil fuel. So that's what we're eating. And this is the Haber-Bosch process. This is how they make nitrogen fertilizer from oil and gas. And that's literally now the nitrogen in our human bodies, that's where it's coming from. Because we blew through the topsoil, it's all gone. So the only place left for it to come from is oil and gas. Not a plan with a future. Even if you don't care about a single other thing that I've said here today, what are we going to do when it runs out? It doesn't recreate itself. Like, we're going to suck it all out of the ground, and then what? Like, there's no real future here. We just made the problem worse by using oil and gas on top of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some people that think we're going to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, kind of like bacteria do, in a synthetic process, and build protein that way, and use algae or plankton or something like that. I'm not sure what their plans are, but it seems like it's not going to work.
We can just let cows and bison do it for us. That's
right,
the thing.
Exactly, yeah.
They will just do it. It's what they enjoy, is wandering around and eating grass. Like, they would have really good lives just doing that thing that they were designed to do. And then they make perfect food for us. So what? Why fuss around with algae? Nobody wants to eat it. Just leave it be. We can do this.
Yeah, you won't get any argument from me about that. It's one of the things, the point you made earlier about, we all, I'll drive across the countryside and I'll see a bunch of cows in a pasture just kind of hanging out, munching on grass, but they're not being managed. And,
right.
Even though you say, well, look at that, those happy cows out there, but really, like you said, you should see them in a smaller, closed off area that's been moved. And I've been to, I've had the fortune to been on a number of these regenerative ranches and talk to the ranchers, and they've got it down. I mean, they've got it to where not only is it productive, but it's profitable for them. And so it just seems like it's a big win-win for everybody when we adopt that. And I think you can feed the mass of humanity that way if we just put our mind to it. I think there's clearly that to do. I know the other thing, because you're in Northern California, fires are a big problem. This is another thing that we don't realize, that by having those animals clearing out all that brush that is just fuel.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just tinder that's waiting to go, and you can use animals in that way to do that as well. Are you seeing much of that? I mean, I know there's been some criticisms
There's
about
little bits of it. Like there's definitely a lot of people understand that, but how do you get it into policy is a whole different question. And that's the hard part, is oh man, just fighting that bureaucracy. It's a lifetime project, but when they get any kind of appropriate browser into those forests, yes, of course, that's what they eat. So it brings down that fuel load like dramatically. And it's just like with, how there should be bison on the Great Plains. There should be so many more animals in that forest. And it's, humans kind of messed it up. So we can put it to right, but we have to understand the principle. And if that was done properly, yeah, the fuel load would go way down and we wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing.
Yeah, speaking of the 60 million, or I mean, I've seen different quotes, 30 million, 60 million, maybe as many as 100 million or whatever. I mean, clearly there was an enormous amount of bison roaming, and then we've got, evidence from the latter half of the 19th century, 1860s or so, and we started hunting them. You see these giant, pictures of thousands and thousands of buffalo, skulls and skeletons, which is just, we just kind of decimated that to the detriment of the Native American population. But I think the bison are, I don't know what the population is now, but I think we have maybe 500,000 of them or something like that back. I know there's a lot of people that are trying to restore that, and they are, really, really neat animals. Are you doing any kind of farming yourself still? Is that something you do, or what keeps your time occupied these days?
So what I have is I have a little garden, which I enjoy. And then I have giant dogs that I love. I did have goats here for a little bit, and that was really fun too. And I highly recommend goats. They're incredibly versatile, but for various reasons, I'm just not going to get into, the goats went somewhere else. So I don't have goats anymore. I do want to get livestock again soon. I've only lived in this house for 4 years, 5 years. So infrastructure is always an issue when you get livestock. It takes a lot more than people know if you haven't done it. In the past, I've had every kind of fowl, who also I just love. So I've had chickens, ducks, geese, guinea fowl, pigeons. I've had them all, and they're all just wonderful in their own ways. And geese actually are good because they're grazers. The ducks and the chickens are more kind of omnivorous, but geese really just want grass. So, and they can pretty much live on just that. So if you can't get yourself a goat or a cow or a sheep or something bigger, honestly, geese are, I mean, they're kind of evil tempered, but they're a good ruminant. They're not really, but they're a good grazer to start with. And they're smaller, so you don't need like huge amounts of stuff for them. But I do want to get into it again. I've just been way too busy, various health problems, blah, blah. So at this moment, I don't really have the exact setup that I want. What I really want is one of those mini cows, because that's like just perfect for like me and mine. Like it'd be just enough milk, and they're so cute. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of them, but they have these really small cows that, as it turns out, are more like historically what people had for cows. That in the 19th century, there was this craze for making giant animals, and everything got bred to be larger, and there were like contests for the biggest cow and all this. But up until that point, cows were actually the average cow that a farmer would have was a lot smaller. And in fact, often a cow would be given, like a calf would be given to a small child as both a pet and sort of the first animal to have on a farm, because they were so much smaller, even children could handle them. So I just feel like I'm going back to something more traditional to get a little cow, but that's what I want ultimately, is one of those, or two of those little ones. So anyway, yeah, but I live in a rural area. So for me, the food supply is not as crucial because I have access to, just all kinds of great stuff. I can get really great eggs. I can get fantastic grass-fed beef. There's even a pasture-raised pork producer right in my neighborhood. And we, believe it or not, have a cheese factory here. I live in this tiny little rural town, and we have an award-winning cheese factory. It's called Rumiano's. They went to a cheese competition in Devon, England, which, if you know anything about dairy, that's like the center of the world, right? And they brought home a blue ribbon. So they're good, but they also are very committed to having local grass-fed milk in all of their products. So I can just go get the cheapest cheese imaginable, and it's the best stuff in the world. And I just feel so lucky. Also, I live right on the coast, so there's fish coming in every day on the dock. So I just feel like, for me, this is like, I mean, it's heaven for if you're into kind of native nutrition and ancestral food. It doesn't get any better than where I live, very easily. There's no work involved. It's all here.
Awesome. Hey, let me ask you, do you still pay attention to or tangentially involved with the vegan community? I imagine there's some folks that were maybe looking to you as a reason to leave, perhaps. Do you find that, I mean, I hear a lot of, it's becoming more popular, but I just think it's just more turnover. We're just getting more people to try and leaving again. Is that still what we're seeing? It's good. It seems like there's a very high turnover.
Yeah. The average person who tries being a vegan doesn't even last 2 months. That's what the research shows. So A, most people are smarter than me because I did it for 20 years. But B, I mean, that's a lot of people who tried it and know that it's a waste of time. And most people, I think, if you're not in that deep, if you leave at the 2-month mark, it's not that big a deal. The real problem is when you're in for a few years and it's become your whole world. Then you've got a whole nother problem getting out. But I mean, I get emails on the regular from people who, were in it for a while, at least a few years, and they realize that their health is collapsing. I mean, they're onto that way sooner than I was, and they know that it's not working, and they don't really know what to do about it. So somebody somewhere has recommended my book, and there's a lot of books now that will walk you through why this isn't a good idea. But they need support. They need help because it's hard. It's a hard thing when you've committed to this and you really believe in it, and then it fails you. And it is a very confusing time. So it's my job. I hold their hands and we exchange a lot of emails. Sometimes we talk on the phone. And I just sort of help them through some of their dilemmas about it, because it's an ethical dilemma. It's a spiritual dilemma. They're very confused, and it's a hard moment in one's life. And having been there, I know. So I'm always happy to talk to people like that, especially when there are children involved. Those are the really hard cases, because if they've done this to their kids, to very young children, 1, 2, 3 years old, that's rough. That would be a lot of guilt if I was that parent. And people shouldn't feel bad. You did the best you could. Like, it's not anybody's fault, but some of those kids are not doing well. So it's a hard thing. But those people I want to save as fast as I can. Like, just start eating butter now. Give your children an egg now when we get off the phone, like some real food of some kind. I promise you, you will not feel sorry about this. So yeah, I don't know if more people are trying it. If they are trying it, more people are coming out of it for sure. I mean, I hope that our side is winning, because their side dead ends. It dead ends with wrecked bodies. It dead ends with dead topsoil. It dead ends with, dead small communities. It dead ends. There's no way forward with a world that doesn't involve animals. And it's weird for people who say they love animals. They would like a landscape in which there are no animals, is essentially what they're saying.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of them look that far in the future, and I think they're kind of mystified by the propaganda there.
Well, they don't know where their food comes from. It's like this profound ignorance about what agriculture is, and they don't know. So once you explain it to them, it's very upsetting, because they realize there's a lot of dead animals in their food, but it's the truth. And the only way you're going to make the best decision is if you have the best information.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I would say that probably we won't have a vegan world, much to the chagrin of many vegans who think that's going to be the case. But we are seeing, these kind of push towards like pegan, like we have Mark Hyman talking about, meat should be a condiment, the majority of plate should be. And I think that's just as problematic in my view, because I think you're basically maybe kind of kicking the problem down the curb a little bit, where you give yourself this minuscule amount of nutrition so you don't flat out die, but you definitely compromise your health in the long term. So I think that's where I think
I just have to believe that most people aren't going to fall for it, because you can eat that food and it's like, all right, I ate some food, but you don't feel nourished. You don't feel fed. You're hungry again pretty quickly. And the more you do it, of course, the more you're going to be on that kind of insulin roller coaster, because it's way too much sugar, no matter what version of it you eat. And I just have to believe that most people, they give it a week or two and it's like, I just feel terrible. I'm exhausted. I'm freezing cold. I'm starving. Give me a burger. And then you feel better. Like, this is just, it doesn't work. It's crap. And I've talked to people like that too, and they just have funny stories about it. Like exactly that. I was exhausted, I was depressed, I was cold. I ate a burger, I never looked back. Like, okay, so you know what real food is. Because we do know, like your body responds, like you know that you've finally been fed. And so I just have to believe that they're not going to get all that far pushing. It's an ideological drive. It doesn't actually meet the needs of the human template. And I just have to believe that most people, even if they try it short term, you feel so terrible when you're doing it that they're just going to revert to what makes them honestly feel alive again and like they've had some real food.
Do you, when you sort of, transition back from being, on a plant-based or a vegan diet, you had a lot of backlash. Is that something that has improved over the years? You still get quite a bit of the people coming after you. I've had some of the new vegans don't even remember,
Right.
realize
No,
where
I
you're
think it's
going.
been long enough that I think the worst of it is over. I think there's like a core of people who will always hate me, and my name comes up, and it's like, but I think that was long enough ago that they've got new people to hate every day, and the ones I think they love to focus on are the celebrities that go vegan, and then a year or two later, like, can't do this anymore, and they start eating real food again, and that's who they love to pile on. So it's like, okay, they deflected from me because there's always a new target, which of course I feel sorry for those people, but it helps my life because there's always someone that is not going to be me that'll get their rage going for the day. Yeah, I'm sure there's always those people who are going to hate me, but whatever. I sort of knew that I was going to be infamous, shall we say, for writing that book, and I did my part. Like, I'm just, what can you say? Like, they're ideologically bound, and it's a fundamentalist worldview, and so anybody like me who's an apostate is definitely going to be on the bad list forever. But it's not as bad as it was. I don't get the levels of hate mail that I got even 5 years ago. So I assume they've moved on or gotten over it, and I have to believe some of those people realized they were wrong, because it's been another 5 years of eating nothing but carbohydrate, and they felt like crap. So some of them for sure have had to learn to eat another way, and then had to realize that they were involved in something that was not particularly a plan with a future. So
How often did you run into, I guess when you were in those circles, did you find it with people?
oh, it's been bad. Like, I'll walk into a conference about not
Or,
even anything related to
be
this,
suspicious?
right?
Because we hear kind of thoughts on that. Are there many people that you find doing that?
Started
What's
I
that?
I'm sorry, we there was a glip. Say it again.
Okay, I was just wondering, when you were participating in the plant-based community, the vegan community, did you run into people that were, falling off the wagon occasionally in the background, just kind of having some eggs and having seafood and stuff like that, or were they pretty much to their ideology?
It was constant. It's so few of them could do it really hardcore and consistently. Even I think about her a lot. The other teenage girl who turned me on to being a vegan, even at that point, we were 15, 16 years old. She would every single week, I'm not exaggerating, every single week, she would stop at McDonald's on the way home from school and eat a burger and a big milkshake. And then the next day, like, oh no, I'm a vegan. And it was like, you could clock it. It was like every Friday she would have to do it. And at the time I was very confused by this behavior because I was so hardcore. I was like, I'm never going back. But of course now I'm like, good for you, Pilar. Like, you were actually hungry and you took care of that. And I'm sure you felt really guilty about it, but it was the right thing, because you can bet that a few years later, after she got out of her parents' house, she gave it up completely. And also, she wasn't going to end up with the same health problems I did, because she actually was getting some nutrition at least once a week. So it's not even like falling off the wagon. It's like listening to what your body needs and then attending to it. That's honestly what's going on. But yeah, when they do research about this, the average person who calls themselves a vegan cheats once a week. They admit it if it's anonymous, once a week. And you know what they eat? A burger, which to me is still kind of horrifying. Like, because for me, it was like, every like few years I would eat some cream cheese and then feel horribly guilty about it. But this is like once a week eating a burger, and they still call themselves vegan. So it's like, even the people who say they're doing it, they're not doing it. It's like, it's really not possible for humans to eat that way. And we just need to, I don't know, just come on, people, get over it. Like, this thing doesn't work. And the thing that, oh, the one that will just drive you crazy is some of the really big kind of movers and shakers in vegan world. They're just lying. And I know this because one time I went to one of the big paleo conferences. I mean, I assumed it was true, right? But there was a guy there who sells seafood from Alaska. He's one of the producers of, I mean, it's very, very sustainably sourced. This his passion is to make sure that salmon survive. So that's what he does, is he makes, he has this business where he sells salmon and he makes sure that it's the good stuff. And he's very engaged in all of that. But he pulled me aside and he's like, everything you're saying is true. I know for a fact because they all come to me when their health is failing. And these are the big names. I can't tell you who they are because I've promised to keep them secret, but they're lying to everybody. This is what they're eating, every week. And when their other famous, sort of followers and clients also start falling off, this is what they tell them to do. And they all come to me and this is where they buy their salmon. So I can tell you all of these people are at least eating salmon, if not beef. But they can't, this is how they earn a living. This is their whole social media following, and they can't complain about it because they'll lose everything. So they're lying to everyone. And it makes me mad because it means that, every generation now, there's more young people getting sucked into it, even when the leaders of it know that it doesn't work for them. And I just think that's immoral. I don't care about your social media following. You need to just man up, woman up, admit you were wrong, and find a new future, because telling young people that they can do this to themselves, knowing that they're going to wreck their bodies, just seems immoral.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned that you've had some, health issues, some of them which have been relatively permanent since you went vegan, but were you able to improve your health to some degree when you finally, I mean, what was a moment where you said, I can't do this anymore? Was it a health thing? Was it discovery?
I mean, I had so many snowballing health problems that by the time I gave up, I was kind of half dead essentially. And I mean, it's kind of a cute story, but the day that I gave it up, it was a Qigong healer, which is a form of traditional Chinese medicine. And I have a lot of respect for that form of medicine, that the acupuncturists and the people who do the Chinese herbs, they have helped me a lot. And I know it's a completely different sort of worldview from what we have with Western medicine. So, it's not everybody's thing. I get that. Not everybody's going to understand it or believe in it. And I don't need to pressure anybody to do that, but I have found them to be incredibly helpful. So as somebody that I respected, I went to see him, and he's, an elderly gentleman, and he'd been doing this his whole life. He's an immigrant from China. He learned from the best there. And then he moved to San Francisco, and, that's what he does with his life, is he heals people. So I was willing to listen to him because I respected him. And the main form of diagnosis in Chinese medicine is they take your pulses, and which is very different than how a nurse would take your pulse in the ER. It's a completely different kind of pulse, but they're trying to get information about the different meridians, the energy flow in your body, and what you've got, and where the imbalances are. So he goes to take my pulses, and he's completely horrified. He's like, "You have nothing. Like, there's no energy at all in your body," which of course is how I felt. I mean, just felt like I was a corpse dragging a corpse. It was that bad. And we had proceeded to have this long conversation where he said, you just can't keep doing what you're doing. And I, of course, cried because this was going to be the end of everything. My world was going to collapse. But I also knew he was right. I had gotten to that point where I was so desperate. I felt so sick all the time. Just every waking minute was just sort of low-level torture, and I don't know. And the thing is, I had seen all my friends go through this before, including some family members, where we had all done this, sort of long-term, either vegetarian or vegan. And one by one, they had all stopped. 10 years in, 12 years in, my sister was like, "You would feel so much better if you would just eat a little fish now and then," because she'd already given in, to the truth of this. And I was like, "No, I can't. I would be a terrible person. I'm not giving up. This has to be the way." And she would just shake her head, very sweetly, like, "You're going to have to do it eventually." I was like, "No, I'm not gonna." Anyway, I sort of knew it was coming when I went to see him. I had this, very bad feeling that this was going to be the end for me. And I just sort of gave up in that moment when he was like, "You're just going to die if you keep doing this. It's also, you're so damaged, I can't really help you," was sort of the other take home point. Like, if you had come to me 10 years ago, maybe, but at this point, you've wrecked it, kitty. So I was like, "All right, well, what do I do?" He's like, "Just eat meat. You'll feel better." Okay. So I did. I ate this can of tuna fish, and that was it. He was absolutely right. But Anyway, some of it got better. There's definitely things that have gotten better in my life. And it's the easier things, of course. So I was utterly infertile as a adult human female. I never menstruated, probably wasn't even ovulating, like who knows. The only good part about this is that I was not actively trying to have a baby. So I didn't have that kind of grief that others go through when they can't have a baby. That part didn't happen to me. But if I had wanted to have a baby, I'm sure it would have been years of just constant grief and sorrow and confusion and all of that, because it just all ground to a halt. And I understand now that this is a very predictable response to not having any animal fat in your diet. This is what happens to women who aren't giving their bodies what they would need in order to produce a baby. Like, your body knows we are starving, no baby is happening. And that's just what it does. It shuts it all down. But I didn't know that then. So, and I had been to doctors and explained, like, I don't know what's happening. And they're like, well, you can go on the pill. I was like, I don't want to go on the pill. I want to understand what's wrong. And nobody could tell me. Of course, nobody asked me any questions about what I was eating. That seems like, baseline question, but they're not trained in that. We know this about doctors. They're overwhelmed with all their other things they have to learn. Nobody gives them basic nutrition. And if they were given nutrition, what it would have been. It would have been, low fat, high carb, blah, blah, which is what exactly got me into this position. So anyway, it didn't take that long of eating real food, and that started to stabilize pretty quickly, which was kind of amazing. And then when I took soy out of my diet completely, that was the end. Like, it was just menstrual period every 28 days, clockwork. And it was amazing to see that happen, because I just didn't know, even when you accumulate sort of intellectual knowledge, when you experience it yourself, you're like, wow, I really made a mess here. I really just destroyed my reproductive organs doing this. So that got better. It actually came back to life, and it just cycled until menopause. That was great. I did end up with uterine fibroids, which obviously is very common for women in their 40s, but I got my eye on soy for that one. I don't think that that's actually normal. So I had to have, the things removed and blah, 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 but I'm fine. I mean, that all worked out really well. So that was one thing that got better. All of that emotional stuff that the vegans go through, the anxiety, the depression, it's like your world just constantly collapsing into this like existential despair. There's a level of that I cannot describe to somebody who has not eaten this diet. Because the moment you eat real food, it evaporates and life is good. You can see color again, and you can smell the roses and pet the dogs. And even when hardship happens, you've got bounce, like, you'll get through. I'm not exaggerating. If I lost my car keys, I would be crying on the living room floor. Like, that's how bad it was. And that's what happens to your brain on veganism. It's just, there's no way to have a steady mood state when you're not eating any animal fat and not enough protein. You don't have any neurotransmitters, and you don't have, like, the brain. Your brain is like 80% fat. So it doesn't have any way to repair itself and to build what should be, that incredible thing that's a human brain. In fact, that big Oxford study showed that within, I think, 2-3 years of being vegan, that your brain shrinks about 5%. So you're literally losing brain volume. So this is an organ that's like 2 million years in the making, evolutionarily speaking, and you can basically wreck it in 2 or 3 years of just not giving it what it needs, which is kind of a grim thought. But anyway, all of that goes away, like the depression, the anxiety, there's just the rages that you can't control, just the insanity of what it's like to live in that little cage that you've made of your own starving brain. That goes away immediately, and you'll feel better in a week or two on real food. So that's great. It's really nice not to be depressed. That's a good thing. Some of the more like kind of low level stuff, I had the worst dry skin that I don't even have words to describe. It actively hurt, and it hurt so bad it would keep me up at night. That's how much it hurt. It was so dry. I couldn't move my limbs without it hurting. And I just thought that was normal because I'd gotten so used to it. And honestly, 4 days into having eggs in my diet, it completely evaporated. So I woke up that morning, I just remember, wow, I can like move my arms and it doesn't hurt. Why did I think that was normal? That your skin wouldn't stretch to like meet your body where it's going. And my face completely changed, my complexion, because I had that gray vegan pallor that they all get. I was like, oh, I look like a pretty person again. Like I've got color in my face and I look like I'm alive. I kept going back to the mirror all day, like, look, I look so different. And that was just from eggs, like, but you know, you get a little bit of fat in there and look what happens. So that the skin stuff went away. Another small, but you know, it's a thing. I had horrible plantar's warts on my feet, and they just disappeared within 2 weeks, all on their own, just gone. So there's your immune system kicking back into life. So all that stuff, that got better. I did end up with a condition called gastroparesis, which is essentially you don't have enough enzyme to digest your food because you've shut it down. And the reason you shut it down is that, you know, really quickly, that roller coaster that you're on with the eating the carbohydrate and then the insulin and then the crash. Part of the crash involves your body producing adrenaline to get your blood sugar back up, because that's actually one thing adrenaline will do for you. The problem is that when you're doing it 3, 4, 5 times a day, of course, you're going to burn through all of those receptors. So I mean, your adrenal glands are just exhausted. But also one of the side effects of this is that, so imagine you are being attacked by a lion, right? So boom, adrenaline hit. And what does the adrenaline do for you? It sends all your energy into your muscles, your big muscles, so you can fight off that lion or run. And it shuts down everything else so that your muscles can get all that energy. And so immediately what it shuts down is all your digestive processes. The theory being, you know, you're going to need all that energy to fight. You don't need to digest your food right now. We're just putting a halt to that. Fight, run, live to see another day. You can digest your food in a few hours. That's great if it's one lion once a year, but you're doing that all the time when you're eating those high carb diets. And so that process of shutting down your digestion, that's what's happening. And if you do that over and over again, which is what I did, I destroyed my body's capacity to make hydrochloric acid. So there's an easy fix for this. It's called betaine hydrochloride. And if some of you are feeling nauseated all the time when you eat, and you've been on one of those kinds of diets, this may be your problem. And it's an over-the-counter supplement, so it's an easy fix. Try it, you may get a miracle cure. I did. So I still eat that with every meal, but the nausea is so dramatically better than it was. It's not even worth discussing. Like, you can actually cure that one. It takes time, but I can eat again. Wow, that's amazing. So that one got better. The stuff that never went away. So I've got multiple autoimmune diseases now that just keep rolling, and nothing I do seems to affect those. So I'm on some pretty heavy duty medication. That sucks. And then also, I mean, the really big one is that I wrecked my spine. So the discs in my spine, the joints, I just wrecked them. All your joints are very poorly vascularized. And this is the problem when you do an injury to them. That's why it's so hard to heal it. It's once it starts going, it's really hard to get it back, and they just don't repair. So I did that. I did the nutritional equivalent of a massive car wreck, because when the orthopedists see my MRI, that's their first question. Oh, you were in a really bad car accident? No. Oh, you fell off a roof? No. Skydiving? Was it skydiving? No. It was the nutritional equivalent. I was a vegan for 20 years, and this is the great result. So you will eventually just degrade your joints to the point where they don't work. So I've met a lot of ex-vegans like me. Some of them have my exact condition, which is always kind of amazing, in a sad sort of way, but it's always good to talk to people who are exactly in your tribe, you know. But a lot of vegans, it's like it's the ankles, the knees, or the hips will go first, other weight-bearing kinds of joints. And if you catch it soon enough, you might be able to get it back, but for a lot of us, it's just been too long. So especially I'll point to soy, because soy blocks the absorption of zinc very heavily. It blocks all the minerals, but zinc especially. And zinc is really plays a very crucial role in that formation of the collagen that builds your joints. So it all got way worse when I was eating tons of soy toward the end of my vegan life. And now I understand why. That was the sort of step-by-step thing that happened. So that one's not coming back. So I will always have a lot of restrictions on my physical activity. I will always live in a fairly high level of pain. It's just, you got to live with it. You do what you do. And now, I don't know, it's just, I've made peace with it more or less. I mean, it would be really great if there was a medical cure, and they're getting better and better with things like gene therapy, and who knows, maybe in a few years they'll be able to grow me a new one. But for now, I just do what I can do. So So it's good, it's bad, but I mean, I've also gotten, one of the most heart-wrenching letters I ever got was from a neurologist in Germany who wrote me a really beautiful letter about my book. And he said that every week he sees these people in his practice, and they have been vegan for a number of years, and they have destroyed either their sight or their hearing from this vegan diet, particularly a lack of B12, but also the lack of all the nutrients you need to be able to have eyes that work. And they have just destroyed their ability to see and to hear. And I just don't even know how you live with that after you've done that to yourself. It'd be just so sad and so pointless. And he was very happy to have my book. He said, I now have this book to give them, and you have helped some of them get out of this crazy world. So I like to think that at least my story, if it does some good in the world, all right, well, at least that's some solace to, what I've done to myself. But yeah, it's hard, you do silly things when you're a teenager, and sometimes you don't get out of it till it's too late.
Well, Lierre, thank you again for being here. I unfortunately have to go do some consultations here in just a minute, but I want to give you a moment just to let people know I know your book is probably still for sale, I'm sure, and where they can go to find more information about you or your website or any of that stuff.
So my website's really easy because it's just my name, LierreKeith.com. But that's a joke because I actually have a really weird name, so you're probably not going to remember how to spell it. The easiest way to get to my website, Vegetarian Myth. There's only one book with that title, and I wrote it. So if you type that in and you can remember that, that's the easy way in. Just type that into Google, you'll find me. So you can see, everything I'm doing, my other books, different podcasts, interviews, all the fun stuff is there. So take a look.
Okay. Thank you so much, folks. Thanks for being here, everybody. You guys have a great day. We'll talk to everybody soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Join Revero.health for a 30-day free trial to get access to live Q&A with VIP guests, social community meetings, member discounts, low-carb healthcare providers list, forum, workouts, monthly challenges, early access to podcasts, recipes, carnivore diet guide, fasting guide, shred guide, and much more.